And welcome to today's segment of The Power of Money. I'm your host, Michelle Graves, affectionately known throughout the United States as the original Money Lady. Since 1976, I have been working with individuals just like you in the areas of estate planning, insurance, real estate, and international finance. And a part of this program's mission is to inform you, my viewers, about financial areas that will equip you to make wise decisions for you and your family. So it is with great delight that I bring to you today a gentleman that I had on earlier who is well established in the marketplace, Michael Millonig, whose offices are in Dayton, Ohio. Just to give you a little bit of background about Mr. Millonig, attorney at law, he is a member of the Ohio State Bar Association Board of Certified Estate Planning, Trust, and Probate Specialist. He is a certified estate law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation. He is considered a super lawyer by his peers in the area of estate planning, and he is also a VA accredited attorney, which is very important for those of you that are veterans that need assistance as well. And today we're going to be continuing our conversation, because we just ran out of time the last time, about estate planning. And our focus today, and this is so very vital for all of you that are seniors and all of you who are children of seniors, and that is, the subject is going to be how to protect your assets from nursing home seizure. Now, let me give you all a discomforting but truthful statistic. 2 out of 3 individuals will spend some time in a long-term care facility. Now, please be aware, viewers, and this happens over and over again, Medicare, which is health care for individuals over the age of 65, is not Medicaid, which is an indigent program that has very specific federal guidelines and restrictions and is limited to people that are indigents. You can't have more than, I think the threshold in Ohio is $1,200 a month. But again, as a part of that qualification process, you have to know how this has to work, or else many of you are going to find yourselves losing your home, your stocks, bonds, investments, etc. The notion of having a legacy for your children and grandchildren just falls apart when you start talking about Medicaid and long-term care without private insurance. So this is the subject today. Please sit down, listen carefully, take notes, and by all means, if you have questions and you need to sit down, Michael J. Millonig is the attorney that I strongly support. How are you today?
Very good, thank you.
Good to have you back. I'm so glad that you took time out of your schedule to continue our conversation. Where do we want to begin with this issue of nursing homes and assets?
Well, let's just begin with the basics and make sure everyone understands Medicare, although it does cover normal medical expenses for older people, Medicare does not pay for the nursing home bill. There's a limited coverage. If you meet the criteria and you're in a nursing home for the first 20 days, it might cover it. And then day 21 through 100, it might continue to cover that. But in the long run, Medicare does not pay your nursing home bill.
And that is so misunderstood, because I hear and I've heard over the years, because I am a strong proponent of long-term care insurance. Reason being because people need it and they use it. But there's so much confusion in the marketplace, Michael, with regard to Medicare versus Medicaid. So, would you continue to elaborate?
Well, yeah, the Medicaid program, normally people think of that as someone who's poor or has some other type of program that they go on Medicaid. But in fact, Medicaid pays half of all nursing home bills overall. So it's a major source of payment for the nursing home industry. And that's what people, I think the national statistic is the average person goes into a nursing home and then 6 months later they're on Medicaid.
That is stunning. And that's very, very, very troubling, particularly in today's economic climate where, as I understand it, the Medicaid program is a federal state program.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a little unusual because we have federal programs like Medicare or Social Security, and they're all run by the federal government. So if you want to apply for benefits, you're talking to a federal agency. But Medicaid program, so we have federal money and a federal agency, and Congress passes laws, but each state actually administers and runs the program.
Do they have their own guidelines, or are they under federal mandates?
It's kind of a mix. Yeah, there are federal mandates. So for the most part, they're required to follow federal law, but there's a lot of areas where each state is allowed to make certain choices and have differences. And more importantly, since they're administering it, they interpret it and do things the way they want to. So we really have 50 different Medicaid programs, and it's important to understand that you can go on the internet and get all kinds of information.
Right. It's scary, actually. Yeah. It's all kinds of information.
But if it's not, in terms of Medicaid, it needs to be specific to your state, because if you're just looking at something general, it might not be correct for Ohio.
So, given the fact that, and I was doing some research on this Medicaid issue, and frankly, Medicaid is bankrupting the budget for the state of Ohio. It is a large portion of the revenues that are coming in. A large portion of that is going to pay for Medicaid recipients.
Right, and politically, that's a big. Medicaid is a huge budget issue, and I don't have any solution. My job as an attorney is to advise people, so I don't have any budget advice or solutions. My job is just to figure out what the law is and advise people.
Right.
But yeah, it is a big budget problem.
Right. Well, I can only conclude that as we go deeper into this business cycle in terms of declining revenues, Medicaid is going to be more and more and more targeted as an area for cutbacks. And that's why this subject matter today is so very important. And from where I stand as an advisor, you're saying that usually and typically within 6 months of a person going into a nursing home facility for long-term care purposes, that they are penniless.
Well, that's like a nationwide kind of average.
Okay, right. Well, if you look at $9,000 a month as being the average cost, not including Alzheimer, which is a more expensive type of a process, $54,000 goes fast.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. And then they've liquidated everything and they have nothing. And then at that point, they're technically bankrupt and are qualifiable potentially under Medicaid guidelines.
Well, the basic rule in Ohio is if your total assets or resources are below $1,500, then you're eligible.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot more to it than that. There's all kinds of other rules above that, like for a married couple, if the spouse, we call that person the community spouse, is still living in the home is exempt. And one car for the community spouse is exempt. So that's kind of beyond the $1,500. There's you don't always have to get down to exactly $1,500. There's other things that are exempt above that.
Well, I want to talk about this because in Cincinnati there was a I-Team, Channel 9 I-Team investigation about a couple, and it's on internet, and it is very troubling because this couple, she had a surgery, major surgery, where a major incision was made in the middle of her body, and it was a deep wound, and essentially, and I'm just constructing this, the hospital wanted to discharge her, and she did not want to go into a facility for care, for long-term care, because it was related to the surgery, the procedure, but the long-term care component is not covered by Medicare. She needed to have round-the-clock care. And she was unwilling, and this was what she said, she was unwilling to sign over the house. Now, she's married. The husband is in the home. And she said she was unwilling to sign over the home. So he was now responsible, Michael, for her care. And they showed on television him actually covering his hands with gloves and doing wound healing, going inside of her. And it was just like, this is the most horrible thing. But the thing that shocked me, and the reason I know something was not right with this as we're looking at it, is there's no way if she went into a facility that they would take their home under the community spouse provisions for the state of Ohio. Yeah. So how did that information get communicated?
Well, it's hard for me to answer that for sure until I know all the facts, but it sounds like that she and her husband were just afraid they were going to lose everything, which is generally correct. But so based on that fear, instead of seeing an elder law attorney, they just went home. But the home would have been exempt.
That's what I know in my own private practice. I was so shocked, and this has been, I mean, you can go on the internet and see this. It's a horrific story. And the response from the public was outrage, and this is terrible, and this is unconscionable. But the reality is, it's Medicaid. And if you find yourself in that type of a situation, then this could potentially happen.
Sure, and again, I don't know all about their situation, but she should have just gone to an elder law attorney and gotten, instead of just being afraid and not knowing what's going to happen, gotten some more answers. I would think that person could have found some more options. Well,
they pleaded to the public. The program aired. The response was just overwhelming, and so now you've got nurses volunteering to come to the house to provide care. And all of these support systems are now coming to the table. But the truth of the matter is, Michael, as you and I both know, this happens every day. Every day, people are having to make decisions, and families, about Medicaid. And if they're not willing or able to take care of that parent or loved one, then those decisions are now upon them. What would you normally recommend?
Well, let me mention this. You kind of bring up an important issue about the home. People want to stay home,
they do.
Whether they need care or not. Sure, issue is a care issue, but people want to stay home. No one wants to go to a nursing home, and that's always people's goal. And there are a lot of times when people do, you kind of bring up the point, well, why can't the family take care of them? Ideally, you would have your family take care of you, but some people don't have children or other family that can do it, or they do, but their kids are in New York or California. And then some people do have a family member that take care of them, but to do that day in and day out, 24/7, for maybe somebody has Alzheimer's, where you just have to be there. You're not doing nursing type care, but you just have to be there. That's a real strain. And then sometimes people do have real medical needs where they really need skilled care, and for someone to do that, it's just not even possible or extremely burdensome. And so, and I have family members I discuss the issue with. I never tell people not to do it. I would never want to tell that to anybody, but I say, well, go ahead and try that and
see how it works.
And and after a while, if it's not working, then we look into going to a nursing home. That's why we have nursing homes.
Right.
So,
Because frankly, in the early stages of Alzheimer's, I think families can come together and support. But the condition is a deteriorating condition. And at the point their days and nights are confused, and things begin to really fall apart. Mom thinks that the the dishcloth is cabbage and is cooking it, and or they don't know what the stove means and create problems. Then you're now confronted with what we should do next.
And what happens too a lot of times is the caregiver, the spouse, it kills them, frankly. It's so hard on them.
It is hard. I can only imagine. I've certainly over the years dealt with this, but my main concern is always what is going to happen with the caregiver. watching the spouse or the parent deteriorate, watching with helplessness and many times hopelessness about a condition that there is no answer to. It continues its downward progression.
Sure.
So what are your recommendations? If I came into you and I gave you a scenario and I said, listen, my father has Parkinson's disease. It's I've tried to provide him with care. We have significant assets. What would your response be?
Well, I'll tell you, before I talk about planning options, let me kind of mention a few more basic things.
Okay, that's fine.
So first of all, understand for a husband and wife, Medicaid looks at everything they both own. So if the
Okay.
husband goes to the nursing home, it doesn't matter if everything's in the wife's name. So
Okay.
it's all kind of marital property.
Because that's misunderstood too.
Right. And then, and actually, it used to be different back before 1989, but that was a long time ago. So, so that's kind of rule. And then rule number one is $1,500 is our basic eligibility limit.
Okay.
The home is exempt for a married couple, not for a single person. If you're
Okay.
single, you have a 13-month kind of exemption period, but after that, it's not exempt. One car for the community spouse is exempt. For a single person, you have a car, one exemption for a car only up to $4,500, which is funny because
Wow.
every
Do
time
you know
I say
any
that,
cars for $4,500?
you see that number came into the law in 1970,
Okay.
and we have something called inflation, which has they've never adjusted that number for inflation.
Wow.
So that all you get is a $4,500 car.
Okay.
That's for a single person.
Okay. And are they allowed to keep that car in perpetuity or what?
Well, they can have a car worth under $4,500 and still be eligible for Medicaid.
Okay,
Now, as a
got
patch, most people don't need that. But,
Right. Okay.
and then also there's what's called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. So in
Okay.
addition to what I already mentioned, if you're the community spouse still at home, you're allowed to keep half of the total resources up to a certain maximum. So and they value that, as you know, the stock market's going up and down every day and values change. As of the first day you go into a nursing home, you take kind of a snapshot or balance sheet, and then the community spouse can keep half.
Okay.
But up to a certain maximum of approximately $113,000.
Okay.
So that's the most you'd get to keep.
Plus the house
Plus the house and one car.
and one car. Now
Right.
the house, is that 100%? Or does the program state that there's a 50% interest to the...
No.
Okay, it's
the
100%.
whole house. And technically there is under the Deficit Reduction Act in 2005, there's actually a home equity limit now, so it can't exceed approximately $500,000.
Okay.
But the real estate market was different when they passed that law.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah.
And frankly, I never see anybody in Dayton where we've had a house at that value that we've been concerned about.
Okay.
And actually, even that, technically, for the community spouse, that limit doesn't apply anyway.
Okay.
But I don't want to spend a lot of time on that.
Okay, all right.
So we have the community spouse resource allowance. IRAs and pension plans are not exempt. Okay.
Period.
We kind of think they are because we hear that they're tax free and they are protected from creditors. There's some laws about that, but Medicaid counts them as long as if it's a pension balance that you have access to, it's countable.
Now,
So-
if an IRA, it doesn't matter if it's in his name or her name because they're
Right.
combining both
combined
under
together.
community spouse provisions.
Correct.
And that money, if it's, it shows as an asset that's available, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Wow,
So that all counts.
that's major.
Let me think, am I missing any other rules? Generally anything you have a value is countable. So even life insurance, a lot of them have a cash value.
Yeah,
Now, if it's just term, that doesn't count. Term
'Cause there's
meaning it only
nothing, yeah.
pays when you pass away.
Right.
But some of them have a cash value.
okay, so they are allowed to keep and count term insurance, whether it's jointly benefits or beneficiaries or him or her, it doesn't matter.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
What about children living at the home? Because many times parents are having to take care of handicapped children. That's an expense. How does that work?
Well, I mean, in terms of the expenses matter. We're kind of, in terms of eligibility, we want to focus on assets.
Okay.
Actually, there are some. We have to talk about the transfer rule, but just to answer
Okay,
your question
alrighty,
first,
okay.
there are some exceptions where if you have a disabled child,
Mm-hmm.
you are allowed to keep that house, even for a single person, and transfer it for the benefit of that disabled child.
Really?
So
if you have an individual who's taking care of a challenged child,
Mm-hmm.
an adult, then, and he or she has to go into a facility as a single person,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a widow or widower, but the child is there, then the child would have, that asset could transfer to the child?
Correct.
Oh, wow, that's nice.
Assuming they are disabled and
Okay, medically
officially
validated,
determined
okay.
by Social Security to be disabled.
Okay, great.
But let's talk about the transfer rule because that's very important. And
Well, let's talk about transfers,
One of the most common questions, given everything I told you, you don't have to be real smart to say, well, why don't we just give everything to our kids
Yes,
or give it away?
yes, yes.
Well, if you could do that, everybody would be on Medicaid.
Yes,
So
yes.
Medicaid has a rule that says if you give away money or property, which means transferring things to the children or whoever your family is, put in their name, you're going to be ineligible for basically up to 5 years.
So
Medicaid
there's a 5-year.
They call it a 5-year look back.
Okay.
So if you make gift transfers, you got 5 years where you're ineligible. And then the odd thing about this rule, I'd really kind of have to give you a numerical example to make it clear, but if I transfer money, maybe just even $50,000,
Okay.
and then I go to a nursing home, and I spend down,
Okay,
and say
to
I'm
your-
single, I get below 1,500, and I say, oh, well, I'll go apply for Medicaid. I apply for Medicaid because I'm below 1,500, and they look back within 5 years, they see, oh, you gave away 50,000 to your son. Now you're ineligible for starting now for the next, and the way they do it, they take, let's say it's 60,000, they take 60,000 and they divide by an official penalty rate, they call it, of 6,023. So you would now be ineligible for the next 10 months. Starting,
wow.
not when you made the gift transfer,
Right.
but starting when you apply for Medicaid and you're below 1,500. So now we got a 10-month
So now you're
window.
impoverished
Yeah.
and you're ineligible. Am I
Correct.
not hearing
That's
that
right. That's
correctly?
correct. Right.
You're broke.
Right, yeah.
You are now ineligible
Yeah.
for that 10-month period
Right.
because of your gifting of this money to the
That's
child.
right. That's right.
I don't think people know that.
No, and a lot of times Medicaid presume you're making they call it an improper transfer. And of course, a lot of times they give their car to a grandchild or people here you can give away $10,000 a year. It's actually 13 now, but that's the gift tax law. Medicaid has no exception for giving away $13,000 a year. So people do that, and they're healthy. They're not thinking about a nursing home at all. But then 3 years later, something happens.
And there they are.
Yeah.
Stuck with that.
And people ask me sometimes, they say, well, what's going to happen to this person? Are they going to get kicked out? And I said, well, yeah, they might. The nursing home doesn't, they can't just, have people sitting there not getting paid. But what can happen is if that $60,000 could be returned to mom, that undoes the penalty.
Right.
So that's a potential solution. But if it's gone, then you can't return that.
So if it's spent, then the children are going to have a dilemma for 10 months.
Correct.
In this particular illustration.
Yeah, and the other thing too is now you might say, or the kids might say, well, we'll use that $60,000 to pay the bill. That actually doesn't work. You'd have to do the math, but I can just tell you from doing experience, it doesn't work because the penalty rate we're talking about, I said with 60,000, we divide by 6,023, it's about 10 months. The problem is the nursing home, at least around Montgomery County area, will cost more than $6,000 a month.
Yeah,
It'll probably be more like $8,000 a month.
Yeah.
So you're going to use up that $60,000 before you get through the 10 months.
So, what do you recommend?
Well, I recommend they don't do the transfer for
Right.
Sometimes people think that's a good plan. We'll transfer and then we'll hope we get through 5 years. Well, that's not good.
Yeah.
That's risky. You don't want to take a risk. I'm going to have to give you a general answer. What I generally do for people, because the answer is different for everybody. There's no simple answer.
Right.
If you go to an attorney or someone, they say, oh, you should do an annuity. And that's what they tell everybody. Or you should do a trust. And that just means that's what they're doing. It's not necessarily what's best for you.
Right.
What's best for you is different. And what I do is I get people's financial information, copies of their bank statement, deeds, and all those things. That way I have accurate information in front of me. I review that, and then I prepare an asset protection plan based on their circumstances.
Asset protection plan.
Right. So
Okay.
based on their circumstances, I'll say, here's your options. And I'll give you some examples. I want to give you one example, which I like to give, because someone came to me a long time ago, and his wife went into the nursing home, and he was fairly young. I think he was in his 60s.
Yeah, that's
And
young.
they had a house, and he had a truck, and then I think about $30,000.
Okay.
Now we talked about the resource allowance, remember?
Right,
So he would be
right.
allowed to keep half of that $30,000.
Right.
Or actually, there's a minimum, but let's just say that's half of the $30,000. And you might think, well, you know, gee, I couldn't do much for him, or it wouldn't be worth him paying me a lot of money. But I said, well, bring your things in, copies of all your information. I reviewed it, and I saw he had a $20,000 loan on that truck. And I said, you hurry up and go out and pay that off right away, and she was eligible right away.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Now, he could have, in paying off that truck, the $30,000 that they both had, and that money could be used to pay off the truck.
Right.
And then there would not be a spend down because
Right.
she's technically...
Yeah, I mean, I saved him $15,000. If he wouldn't have done anything, they would have told him at the Medicaid office to, you know, you got to spend $15,000.
Oh my gosh.
So,
That-
but here
that's
he's financially
a good
better off
case.
because he's
That's
paid
nice.
off.
Good.
So I just give that example to show
Okay.
that you don't have to have a lot of money to make it worthwhile. And it didn't take me much time, so I don't remember what my bill was. It wasn't that much. So some of the, and that's an example, some of the simplest options are what I call a spend down plan.
Okay.
So instead of, let's say you have to spend down $50,000. We do our numbers. You have to spend down 50. We have a community spouse at home. Instead of just paying a nursing home bill, you could do things like pay off a loan.
Right.
Maybe you have a home equity loan. Certainly pay off any loans. The community spouse could buy a new car. They might have an old car, and maybe they don't want a new car, but
Right. Are there caps on how much they can spend on a new car?
There's technically no limit, but I say there's a reasonable limit. I don't think you go out and buy a Rolls Royce.
Yeah,
or something like that.
that's
so there's
a bit
a reasonable
much.
limit.
Yeah. Okay.
You could fix up the house, so you could put on a new roof or furnace. And the thing about some of these things, if you didn't do them, if you just spent $50,000 on the nursing home, a year later, then you might have to get a new roof.
Right.
Or you
and now you're out.
Or you might need a new car 3 years from now. So now you're out. So those are what we call spend down strategies.
Okay. What about buying in advance burial?
Oh yeah. That's the first thing. Doing an irrevocable prepaid funeral plan.
Okay.
And that's almost really the first thing, because let's say someone's single, they're spending down, they're below $1,500, they're on Medicaid, then they pass away. Well, that $1,500 is not enough to pay for all that.
No, it is not.
So a prepaid funeral plan and a burial plot, if you want a plot.
What about is that all
heads to
allowable?
all that.
That's
all
allowable.
those things.
Okay.
So you can
Okay.
prepay that.
Okay. What about clothing and things for while you're
Personal
in the
items,
nursing
and
home?
for a single person too, especially, I say, look, does your dad need anything?
Right.
Does he need glasses? Sometimes aren't covered by Medicare or other insurance, or a nice chair. Or anything
Right.
personal, they need. Get him something personal. So.
That's very good information.
Yeah. And then keep $1,500. You're allowed to keep $1,500, so you might as well keep $1,500. So again, those are kind of what we call spend down strategies. So for a lot of people, that's just a good thing to do. It just depends on the numbers.
Okay.
Some other things, if you're healthy, well, first of all, I really should say, and this is kind of more your area, really, so you might want to say something, but the best thing for people to do when they're healthy is to get long-term care insurance. So,
would you say that again?
Yeah.
Because I am so aggravated by the complete and total absence of reality thinking for so many people. They don't believe it's going to happen to them.
Yeah, and you know what I hear from people?
Yeah.
I don't sell insurance, but I always try to talk to people about when the kind of reaction I get is, oh, I hear it's expensive.
Why don't you follow up and
yeah,
find
and I just say, well, look, it
out?
doesn't go talk to your financial planner. It doesn't cost anything.
Right.
It doesn't, and I say, I try not to give specific advice, even though I'm pretty familiar with policies. I just say, look, get the best you can afford.
Exactly.
Because some people, maybe they can't afford a higher premium. And I also tell agents, be aware of that, and just tell your clients, look, if you tell me you can only budget $2,000 a year for premium, well, that's what we'll get for you. We'll get the most benefit for $2,000 a year premium. And because there's variables you change.
Of course.
And
also, I would say, germane to what you're talking about, is that the family needs to consider funding the premium payment, because ultimately it is a family matter.
Sure.
And the stress and the dread of that thing happening, and not having the funds in place to ensure highest quality care.
Yeah.
As well as under the Ohio Partnership Program, aren't those assets exempt then?
Yeah, the newer policies now are part of what they call the partnership plan, and it basically gives people an additional, what we call like an exemption. And I'll give it a simple example. Let's say Fred buys an Ohio Partnership Plan long-term care policy, and it pays $200,000 total benefit.
Right.
And he had $300,000 of his own money.
Right.
He's single.
Right.
So he goes into the nursing home. It pays out that $200,000.
Okay.
It's all used up. And then he has another $300,000 himself. He doesn't have to spend down to $1,500. He's allowed now to keep $200,000 plus $1,500. He spends down to $201,500, and then he's eligible for Medicaid.
And that $200,000 can actually be a part of his the children's inheritance, correct?
Well, yeah, there's two other benefits. So he could also, we talked about the transfer.
Yes.
You can't transfer things. Well, that's an exception. He would be allowed to give that to children or whoever he wants.
That's powerful.
And we haven't talked about estate recovery yet, but it's also exempt from estate recovery.
It is.
So there's a big benefit to that.
Boy, but it's kind of like, I at one level I said we need to treat this like car insurance. Nobody likes to pay the premiums on car insurance until you're the one that gets crashed. You say,
Right.
well, what's the probability of me getting hit? 100%
Yeah.
when it happens.
Yeah.
But in the interim, you carry it because it is insurance. It's just an offset for risk. Same thing on homeowners. People say, how many times has my house burned down? I said, all it takes is one,
Yeah,
one
right.
time.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, am I ever glad I had insurance? So
Sure.
I understand what you're saying, but that's major to be able to
yeah.
exempt those large sums of money so that can pass through to your family.
Right.
Rather than seeing it pass away to the government.
Exactly.
I mean,
right.
that to me is major. Well, continue. This is
Okay,
good.
so that's
I'm
really
enjoying
our
this.
first plan,
Okay,
is long-term
all right.
insurance. Then our next plan is to look into some type of estate planning or asset protection planning in terms of Medicaid eligibility. And first of all, people have two goals there. The most important goal for a married couple is they want to protect things for their spouse. You don't want your spouse to lose half of everything you got or more.
Right.
Secondary goal is people usually want to pass things on to their children or nieces or nephews, whoever
Or
their
churches
beneficiary
or
is.
charitable.
So that's
Charitable.
kind of secondary. I'll tell you, 90% of the people I do this kind of work for are in what I call a crisis situation. Somebody's already in a nursing home or about ready to go.
Oh, no.
And you might not think there's anything we can do, but like I say, that's 90% of the people I do this kind of work for. For the other 10%, if someone comes in and maybe they can't get insurance because of a health problem, or maybe they do get it, but they still won't. They're not really getting a great policy. One of the most common things I do is set up an irrevocable, I call it an irrevocable Medicaid trust. We put money in there, and it's protected. It's exempt in terms of Medicaid.
Okay.
Now, of course, you can't just do that the day before you go on Medicaid. We have that 5-year look back. So it's really only for someone who's relatively healthy, and we put money in there, and then it's protected. Well, after we get through the 5 years.
Okay.
Now, I describe this trust to people. I say, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have your money in there, but you have full access to it.
Right.
So usually another family member is the trustee in charge of it. And also, people usually don't put everything in there. So if you have, $200,000 estate, you're not going to put everything in there. You're going to keep, 20, 40,000 still in your own name.
Right.
And that's just an individual choice for the person. I tell them, it's just whatever you feel comfortable with, you still want to have in your bank.
Well, even with the look-back provisions of 5 years, if you're setting up this Medicaid trust and you're naming a grandchild as the trustee, for an example, and you do need to get money to live on outside of the money you have, is that an appropriate, can the grandchild disperse money out of the trust for you?
Well, no, not really. I mean,
Okay.
that's, like I say, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right, I
Well,
got you.
Now they can, I'm sorry, you can reserve the income. So if you got money
Okay.
in there, dividends or interest, yeah, you can get the income.
Okay.
But not the principal.
Can you reallocate those assets so that the income could potentially increase?
Oh, sure. The way I describe trust to people is, think of a trust as like an umbrella over whatever you have. So if you
Okay.
have a brokerage account or CDs, so yeah, you can buy and sell and change all that. But
Okay.
it's still in the trust.
Right, okay.
Right.
And with the trust being controlled under the aegis of someone else.
Whoever the
Loving,
trustee
trusted,
is.
Yeah, loving,
right.
trusted
Right.
relationship.
Right,
That's a
right.
powerful vehicle, but you still
Yeah,
are up into that
yeah.
5 year.
Yeah, and it's not for everybody, but it's an option I present to some people.
Okay.
Another common thing is for a married couple is an annuity. So
Okay.
it's a special type of annuity that under the Medicaid rules and regulations will be exempt. And, well, for example, let's just say we have a married couple and they have $200,000 and they would normally have to spend down $100,000.
Right, okay.
Instead of spending it, you could put $100,000 into a special type of annuity, and it would pay to the community spouse every month. You would meet your spend down, and the other spouse would be eligible right away, and that annuity payment goes to the community spouse. They'd be allowed to keep that.
And the reason they would be allowed to keep that is because of the income threshold under those program guidelines?
No, it has nothing to do with the income threshold. Because it's a couple of reasons. First of all, the annuity has to be designed correctly under the rules and
Okay.
regulations of Medicaid, and the income is paid to the community spouse. The community spouse is allowed to keep whatever income they have. And let me talk about the income rules.
Oh my words.
Yeah, now-
This is good.
So far, we've talked about resources or
Right,
assets.
exactly.
There's also income rules, and this is where the states differ. In a state like Colorado, they do have an income limit, and if you're $1 above it, you're not eligible.
My goodness.
Ohio doesn't have that.
Okay.
Ohio really doesn't have an income rule in terms of eligibility. But after you're eligible, there are rules. So the community spouse, they get Social Security or pension or annuity income. They can keep all that, doesn't matter what it is.
Oh my goodness.
But then the nursing home spouse, their income all has to go towards the nursing home. So their pension and Social Security has to go towards the nursing home bill, and then Medicaid picks up the rest.
Okay, so there's no combining of income and splitting down the middle?
Correct.
That
Although there
scenario?
is, I want to mention what's called the monthly income allowance.
Okay.
You can imagine you might have the high income spouse
Right.
in the nursing home, and
Right.
there's someone at home getting
Right, the widow.
$400.
Yeah, 400, the wife.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So Medicaid has an allowance, and it's a kind of a complicated formula, but there's a formula that provides the community spouse with a certain minimum income.
Okay.
Now, I can't really give you the whole formula, but what I tell clients is, it's not based on what you need, okay?
Okay.
There's a minimum amount you get, and that's it. So,
Okay.
and I can just tell you from experience, it's never really, people are used to living on 2 incomes, and now they're losing part of it. So you don't get much out of it.
So that even though the spouse at home has a house, has a car, they still have this issue of being able to live through a monthly income. And that monthly income is only income that is for them, correct?
Correct.
So even if he has a pension, his pension cannot be used as an income for her. That
Correct.
his money is going to pay his bill.
Yeah, except for the monthly income allowance, if anything, you get anything out
Right.
of that.
So this is pretty important. If a spouse is going into a facility, I would think that a properly structured Medicaid annuity that would income would be very, very important.
Sure, but now I don't like to call it income because it's really your principal.
I
You're really,
gotcha.
It's really returning your principal.
Right,
But
right.
since the income rules aren't that great, it's just more, that's why it's so important to save your principal.
Yes, it is.
Sure.
It is. Now, if both, so that I'm clear, his money's being used to pay for his care, and whatever the shortfall, Medicaid is meeting that shortfall.
Correct.
And by dispersing a check for the difference to the nursing home
Well, and
facility.
technically, once you're on Medicaid, there's no nursing home bill. Medicaid they pay their rate. Medicaid sets the rate and sets the bill, basically.
Okay.
So it's that amount minus the applicant's income.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And that's, the nursing home can say predictably that's cash flow coming in
Sure, yeah.
every month,
Yeah.
like clockwork.
Right.
That's a plus for them. But now we got the wife at home, and she is struggling. How do we deal with that?
Well, again, I mean, in terms of income, we can't really change that a lot. It's just, we have to save as much of the resources as we can.
Okay, before he
He's on Medicaid.
is
yeah.
on Medicaid.
Right.
All this pre-planning is very, very important.
Sure.
And I see the value in a person coming to see an individual such as yourself, who is a specialist in this very confusing and misunderstood area. Medicaid is a mess.
Yeah, yeah.
And people are angry because they're losing everything. The children feel that this is a terrible, but with proper pre-planning, a lot of this could have been minimized, wouldn't you say?
Sure, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what are some other areas?
Well, I'll tell you one of the things that we want to talk about too is veterans benefits.
Okay.
Because that kind of interacts with Medicaid. Veterans should be aware that there's lots of, I got a big book with all kinds of veteran benefits, and I don't deal with most of that, but I deal with veterans benefits in the context of long-term care.
Right.
So there's a benefit called aid and attendance.
Right.
So if you need
I love that
long-term
benefit.
care,
Yeah.
you might be eligible for this benefit. But some of the criteria are, first of all, you have to have had 90 days of active service, one of which has to have been during wartime. So you have to have been, you don't necessarily have to have been at war, you know, there's lots of different roles, but you have to have been active during wartime. You could have been in the States or wherever.
Right, right.
There are, the VA has its own income and resource limits as well. They're not as clearly defined as Medicaid, unfortunately.
I know.
The
I'm
general
finding that
asset
out.
limit is like $80,000. That's kind of a guideline, they call it. Let's say someone is in an assisted living facility. And that's the
Okay.
most common thing. If they can meet all those criteria, you would apply for this benefit, and you might get up to, $1,800 a month or so if you qualify.
Tax-free.
Yeah, tax-free, right.
Nice.
And so that, in assisted living, considering the cost of assisted living, that's very helpful. If you're in a nursing home, that's not going to pay too much of the bill. I
Right.
mean, if you can
Right.
get it, you want to get it, but it's not going to solve your problem. There's also a benefit if you're at home. My experience is those are difficult to get. It doesn't mean
Okay.
you shouldn't try, but you have to prove you're homebound and can't get out at all. Some things to be aware of. So that, my experience is people in the assisted living level, that's most helpful for.
Okay.
But again, like Medicaid, we have to spend down according to the VA rules. The thing people have to be careful on, because I see there's a lot of VA benefits advisors out there that have heard things like, oh, you can set up an irrevocable trust for VA benefits, just kind of like I already talked about. And so people will go out and do that, and they could, to get below the 80,000,
Right.
and they could do that and be eligible the next day,
Right.
which is contrary to what I
Right,
said before about
right,
Medicaid.
right, about the
Medicaid has
5
that
years.
transfer rule.
Right.
The VA has no transfer rule.
That's
So you
amazing.
could transfer, you don't even have to do a trust. You could transfer things or do a trust, get below 80,000 and be eligible, which sounds great.
Yes.
People think it's great, but it's not, because if I have a client who has Alzheimer's, they're in assisted living, and then we set up this kind of trust, it's very predictable they will get worse. And
Yeah.
so let's say 3 years later, now they go up to assisted living, and we have to apply for Medicaid. They're not going to be eligible because of the Medicaid rule.
Right.
So we have to think about, in our planning options, we have to not get carried away with focusing only on the BA benefit and doing transfers or trust, or whatever we do, to just focus on that and not looking into the next 5 years and thinking what's going to happen.
Well, I think, and this is powerful, because I do think the aid and attendance benefit for veterans is powerful. And it is a godsend for many people who have limited resources. But you brought up such a point, and it got my attention, because I was like, geez, gotcha.
Yeah.
That's significant.
Yeah, sure.
What would you recommend in that
For-
type of a scenario?
You're talking as a veterans?
Yeah.
We really have to do, and it's difficult, we really have to look at the person's condition and think, gee, is this person going to make it through 5 years? Some people might be at a very early stage of Alzheimer's, or have some other medical condition where we feel pretty comfortable that that they could get through 5 years.
Yes.
So if that's the case, and ultimately that's really kind of the client's decision, because I can't predict that. But if we feel comfortable with that, then we might do an irrevocable Medicaid trust or some type of transfer. So
With the understanding that the guidelines under VA, under the aid and attendance, are not at all comparable to the guidelines under Medicaid.
right, they're different.
And there has to be a real crispness
Yeah.
in that planning to make sure that the client does not get adversely hurt,
Yeah.
wouldn't you say?
Sure, and actually I will say, you say what would I recommend? Well, again, everyone's different, but generally we can do the same type of planning strategies with Medicaid. So I mentioned
Okay,
trust,
right.
spend down,
Right.
Fix up the house kind of thing, or an annuity. So we can generally do this kind of thing.
Right.
Same thing.
That is extremely powerful.
Yeah. Now you have to do that before you apply for benefits, because there's some rules of the VA that once somebody applies for benefits, I can't really advise them or represent them. There's kind of odd rules to that. But beforehand, we can do the same type of planning.
Right.
Then we go in and we apply. And it's the same for Medicaid, because I get this all the time. Even last week, someone said, well, the nursing home told me to go apply for Medicaid right away. Well, they do that all the time, and people go down there and they just waste their time.
Right,
I say,
right.
you want to get some legal advice first.
Right.
Then we figure out what your plan is. Then when I say, I know now you're eligible, now we go apply.
You know what, and I say this having been a practitioner for 36 years plus, I continue to be so incredibly appreciative of the insight and the wisdom that individuals such as yourself as attorneys bring to the whole elder counseling process and the legal, because so much of it is driven by law. And people many times get involved without understanding the critical need for an elder law attorney versus a general practitioner. And I'm not going to speak against your industry, because that would just be totally illogical. But I do feel, and I have counseled seniors and their children, to retain services of an elder law attorney and be prepared to pay, because the dollars that you will save from proper legal counsel and guidance. And of course, you know, we work in tandem with you, and this is an awesome thing. But I just think that if we can leave people with one good piece of advice, I would have to say that the whole area of nursing home, long-term care mandates that you investigate and retain services of a certified elder law attorney. Just as a, not even a negotiable. Because as an advisor, I can't give the level of assistance that pertaining to law that you've been trained to do.
Sure. And the most important thing too is, I think it's hard to get people in terms of planning, estate planning, because we have to think about unpleasant things. We have to think about, gee, what happens when I die, or what if I go to a nursing home? Because a lot of people, their reaction is, well, I'm not going to a nursing home.
I've never met a person in a nursing home that thought they would be there. I'm so serious.
Yeah, but one of the things I say about estate planning in general is, we plan for the worst and we hope for the best.
Yes.
So you don't want to go to a nursing home, and you don't want to die. We know we'll die someday, but we want to think about those things, do our plan, then forget about it, and hopefully be fine and stay home the rest of your life.
Well, on that note, viewers, we are going to conclude today's segment of The Power of Money with my guest, Michael J. Millonig, attorney at law, and a elder law specialist, one of the super lawyers in the state of Ohio by his peers. And I hope the information we've shared with you today on protecting your assets from nursing home seizure has given you some thought. I hope you do not sit back, having gotten this information, and not begin to look at your own circumstances in your families so that you can plan ahead. Nothing is worse than facing a tragedy without proper planning. And this whole nursing home crisis, and it is a crisis, will require very thorough pre-planning. I bid you a great and wonderful day, and as always, God bless you, and I'll see you on our next segment of The Power of Money. I'm your host, Michelle Graves. You take care.